Hey guys, welcome back to more Malicious Compliance Reddit stories. In this Ripestories video, imagine your boss firing you for being disabled and then offering you 1 month's pay to just go away. Karen thought I was powerless in a wheelchair, but she clearly had not read my contract or the law. I held the keys to her entire livelihood and she didn't even realize it until her business was doomed. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is a satisfying XXL malicious compliance story that is titled "Karen Manager Fired Me for Being in a Wheelchair." So I am originally from the UK, but I've been living in Gibraltar for years now. If you don't know much about Gibraltar, it is this tiny British overseas territory right at the southern tip of Spain. We are talking about 2.6 square miles total, with about 30,000 people crammed in there. Everyone knows everyone and gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi. That last part becomes very important later. So I was working at this bar in one of the busy tourist areas. I'm keeping the exact location a bit vague for obvious reasons, but if you know Gibraltar, you know the kind of spot I mean. It's not some fancy cocktail lounge, but just a proper pub-style bar that got a mix of locals, British military lads from the base, and tourists coming off the cruise ships that dock pretty much every other day. The kind of place where you are pulling pints and making gin and tonics all day, nothing really too complicated. The owner, who I will call Karen because she absolutely earned that title over and over again, had bought the business a few years before I started there, and she came into some money through an inheritance and decided she wanted to be her own boss, and bought the bar business from the previous owner who was retiring. She leased the actual premises from the landlord, but the business itself was hers. She ran it and managed it day to day, so she was owner and manager in one, which basically meant there was nobody above her to tell her that she was being insane. Lucky us, I guess. I was one of the first employees she hired when she took over, and I'd been bartending around Gibraltar for years by that point. I knew the regulars, I knew the suppliers, and I knew the licensing regulations, so I was a solid hire, and she knew it. Now here's the thing about running a bar in Gibraltar though, the licensing laws are strict. Much stricter than what most people actually expect. You need a proper liquor license issued by the licensing authority, and it's not just something you slap your name on and forget about it. There's a whole process involving applications, background checks, inspections, conditions that have to be met, and crucially, the license is tied to a specific named individual, the licensee, who takes personal legal responsibility for the premises. That person has to be qualified, experienced in the hospitality industry, and has to be actively involved in the day-to-day running of the place. When Karen took over, she had a problem. She did not have the experience or qualifications to be the licensee herself. She had never worked a single day of hospitality in her life, and before buying the bar, she had been working in admin for some company on the other side of the border in Spain. She watched a few episodes of those bar makeover shows on telly and read some blogs about passive income through hospitality and thought that running a pub looked like easy money. The previous owner's license obviously ended when he left because it was tied to him personally and he was retiring and leaving Gibraltar altogether. Well, this is where I come in. I had years of experience and I had all the relevant certifications you need in Gibraltar for responsible alcohol service. I knew the regulations inside and out and I had a clean record. Karen needed someone to be the named licensee for the premises and I was pretty much the only candidate she had. We worked out a deal. I would be the license holder, which meant legally I was the person responsible for ensuring the bar operated within the law and that alcohol was served responsibly and the premises met all the conditions of the license, all of that. In exchange, on top of my regular wages for working behind the bar, I got a small monthly payment for holding the license. Think of it like a retainer or something. It was not a fortune, but decent enough that it made very much worth my while given the legal responsibility I was taking on here. I told her a few times over the years that she should look into getting her own qualifications sorted so she could hold the license in her own name eventually. I mean, it made sense, right? It's her business. But every time I brought it up, she waved me off and said something like, "I don't have to sit through some boring course, that's what I pay you for." So yeah, that never happened. We put it all in writing though, a proper agreement drawn up with a lawyer because I'm absolutely not stupid, and I'd heard enough stories about business owners trying to screw over employees to know that I needed everything documented. The agreement was clear, the license was in my name, I was the named licensee, and the monthly retainer was guaranteed as long as I held the license, and if my employment ended for any reason, we would need to arrange a proper transfer of the license to another qualified person through the legal process. Until that transfer was completed through the proper channels, the bar could not legally sell alcohol under my license without my involvement. Simple as that. And by the way, guys, as seasoned veterans of r/malicious compliance stories, you can probably imagine what is coming next. However, let me know in the comments, what kind of Reddit story do you prefer the most? I gotta say, at the moment, I love these malicious compliance stories. However, I'm really interested in your opinion. Also, let me know where you are watching from today, and don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed these XXL stories. So, for about 2 years, things were actually okay. Not great, but okay. I mean, Karen was always Karen, and she was one of those managers who had never worked a single bar shift in her life, but would stand behind you during a Friday night rush, telling you that you were pouring pints wrong. She would hover around the bar during peak hours, getting in everyone's way, rearranging the bottles on the shelf while there was a queue 10 deep, and then disappear to do admin during the quiet afternoon shifts when we actually needed help restocking. She also got into arguments with customers constantly. One time she told a group of Spanish tourists that they needed to speak English because this is British territory, which, if you know anything about Gibraltar and the whole cross-border relationship with Spain, went over about as well as you would expect. The group left and she turned to me and said, "See, this is the problem with not having proper border control." And I had to pretend that I was looking for something under the bar so she would not see my face. Another time, she refused to honor a happy hour prize for a local because he had been rude to her the week before. The guy had not been rude, he had asked if the toilets could be cleaned more often, which, to be fair, they did need cleaning more often, but she held grudges like it was an Olympic sport. She had this way of talking to staff like we were kids who had been caught stealing biscuits. Everything was my bar, and my business, and I built this from nothing. I once heard her tell a new hire during training word for word, "Without me, none of you would have jobs, so I think a little bit of gratitude instead of attitude would go a really long way." The new hire lasted 3 weeks, cannot imagine why. She also had a habit of changing the schedule at the last minute and then acting like you were being unreasonable for having other commitments. One time she texted me at 11 PM asking me to open at 7 AM the next morning because she had forgotten to schedule anyone. When I said I couldn't because I had a medical appointment, she replied, "Well, I guess I'll just have to do everything myself as usual. Some of us actually care about this business." Well, she then didn't show up to open either, and the bar opened 2 hours late. When I asked her about it the next day, she said, "I was dealing with a personal emergency," which, based on the tan she came back with, I'm guessing was an emergency trip to the beach. But whatever, I needed the job, and the extra license money was nice, and I mostly just kept my head down and got on with it. The other staff felt the same way. We'd all roll our eyes behind her back, vent to each other during smoke breaks, and then get through the shifts. I mean, it was not the worst job I'd ever had, but Karen made sure it was not the best either. Then about 2 years in, my whole life changed. I had an accident. I don't want to get into it too much detail because honestly it's still something I'm processing, but basically I was hit by a car while crossing the road near the border. It was bad, really bad, and I spent weeks in the hospital, had multiple surgeries, and finally when I got out, I was in a wheelchair. The doctors told me that there was a realistic chance I might walk again eventually with intensive physiotherapy and time, but for the foreseeable future, the wheelchair was my reality. I'm not gonna lie and say I handled it like a champion from day one. There were dark days, weeks where I didn't want to see anyone or talk to anyone, and the adjustment period was brutal, and I'm honestly still working through a lot of it. However, I'm a stubborn person and slowly, with the help of my physio team and some good friends, I started to come out the other side. I started getting used to navigating the world in a chair, started building up my strength, and after a few months of recovery, I started thinking about getting back to some kind of normal life, including work. The bar had a ground floor layout, no stairs to deal with at all. The bar counter had a section that was lower where we used to do table service prep and paperwork. The cellar was downstairs, but changing kegs was only one part of the job, and other staff could handle that easily. I could still take orders, work the till, serve drinks at the lower section, manage stock ordering, handle the accounts, deal with the suppliers on the phone, oversee licensing compliance. There was honestly plenty I could do, and I'd been thinking about exactly how to make it work. I even looked into what reasonable adjustments might be needed, and it was pretty minor stuff. I contacted Karen and told her I was keen to come back, and even if it was part-time to start with, while I continued my physiotherapy. I was honestly nervous about the conversation because I hadn't heard much from her since the accident, and she had sent one text about a week after it happened that said, "Heard about your accident. Hope you're okay. Take care of yourself." And that was it. No visit, no follow-up calls, nothing. One of the other staff told me that Karen had said in front of everyone that my accident was really inconvenient timing because we're about to hit tourist season. So that gives you an idea of the level of empathy we are dealing with. She was not reasonable about it, not even slightly. I'll never forget the phone call. I then explained that I was ready to return to work and that I'd been making great progress with physio and was managing well in the chair, and that I was confident I could handle most of my duties with some relatively minor adjustments. There was this long pause, the kind of pause where you can almost hear someone choosing their words carefully, and then she said something I'll remember for the rest of my life. "I'm sorry, but I just don't see how this is gonna work. A wheelchair behind my bar? What are the customers gonna think? It's not exactly the image I'm going for." I was stunned. For a few seconds I genuinely thought she was joking. I actually waited for the punchline. When it didn't come I said something like, "What image, Karen? It's a pub, not a bloody fashion runway." But she didn't laugh, not even a little. Instead she told me she had moved on and hired people to cover my shifts and that she thought it would be easier for everyone if we just parted ways. She actually said, with what I swear was genuine sincerity in her voice, that she was doing me a favor because the job would be too stressful and too hard for me now, and she did not want me to struggle or hurt myself. Like she was being compassionate, like she was the hero of this story. I just tried to stay calm. I tried to explain that disability discrimination is literally illegal under the Equal Opportunities Act in Gibraltar and that employers are required to make reasonable adjustments and that she could not just fire me because I was in a wheelchair. She got defensive instantly and started saying she was not firing me because of the wheelchair, but because operational needs had changed and she had undergone a business restructuring. I asked her what restructuring she had done exactly, and she stumbled over her words and could not give me a single concrete answer, just kept repeating corporate-sounding buzzwords she had clearly spent 10 minutes googling before the call, and then she said the thing that still makes my blood boil. To this day. She said, "Look, I'm trying to be nice about this. You're in a wheelchair now, the job is physical, and you cannot do it. I don't understand why you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. I will give you a month's pay and we'll call it even, that's more than fair." A month's pay, one single month for 2 years of work for being one of her most reliable employees. And best of all, for holding the liquor license that her entire business legally depended on to operate. I took a deep breath, probably the deepest breath of my life. And I asked her very calmly, "So just to be completely clear, you're terminating my employment, is that correct?" And she said yes. I said, "And you understand what that means for the license situation?" Silence. Then, "What do you mean?" I said, "Karen, the liquor license is in my name, I'm the licensee. If I no longer work at the premises, you're going to need to sort out a transfer to someone else who qualifies. You cannot just keep operating under my license when I'm not employed there." Another silence, longer this time. Then she laughed and said, "Oh, don't be so dramatic. That's just a bit of admin work. I'll sort it out myself. I'll put it in my name or get one of the other staff to do it. It's not a big deal." I wanted to say about 15 different things here. I wanted to tell her that she had no idea what she was talking about. I wanted to explain that she couldn't hold the license because she had 0 qualifications and her track record of running the place was a disaster. I wanted to remind her of all those times I told her to get qualified and she couldn't be bothered, but I didn't say any of that. I just said, "Alright then," and she said, "Good, I'll have someone box up your things and you can come collect them whenever. Just take your stuff and go. Let's not make this into a big drama. Take your stuff and go." Right. Okay, Karen. Because here's the thing about getting a liquor license transferred or getting a new one issued in Gibraltar. It's absolutely, categorically not just a bit of admin work, it's a formal legal process overseen by the licensing authority. You have to submit a full application, demonstrate that the proposed new licensee is a fit and proper person, and prove that they have the qualifications and experience and potentially have the premises re-inspected, and the whole thing has to be approved. It can take months, and even when everything goes smoothly and the applicant is perfect. And Karen, who had 0 hospitality qualifications, 0 licensing experience, who I'd been telling for 2 years to sort out her own credentials, and who had already been cited for noise complaints from the residential properties above the bar on 2 separate occasions, was not gonna find this process quick or easy. After I hung up, I sat there in my flat for probably an hour, just staring at the wall and processing everything, and the anger came in waves. This woman had looked at me, seen the wheelchair, and decided that I was useless, after 2 years of keeping her business legally operational. After every bank holiday weekend I worked because she wanted the day off, after every time I dealt with licensing inspections on my own, while she hid in the back office because she didn't understand the regulations, after every time I smoothed things over with customers she had offended, I was done being nice, but I also remembered what she said to me. She said, "Take your stuff and go." Fine, the license was my stuff and legally, it was literally mine. She told me to take my stuff and go, so that's exactly what I was gonna do. I called my lawyer first thing the next morning, told him everything that had happened and every word she had said to me. My lawyer told me that between my notes and the text she had sent, we had a very strong disability discrimination case under the Equal Opportunities Act, and he also pointed out the obvious: she had a massive licensing problem coming her way. He advised me to do everything by the book, so I wrote Karen a formal letter, very professional, very polite, no emotion, and I stated that following my termination I was providing formal notice that I would be withdrawing as the license holder for the premises effective in 30 days. I outlined that this was in accordance with our original agreement and the relevant licensing regulations. I also noted that I would be pursuing legal advice regarding the circumstances of my dismissal. Everything in that letter was factually accurate, legally correct, and extremely inconvenient for Karen. Then I waited. It took her almost a week to respond, and when she did, professionalism was not on the menu. She called me absolutely screaming. I could barely make out what she was saying at first because she was so hysterical. The general gist was that I was apparently, according to her, trying to destroy her business, and that I was being vindictive and petty because I'm upset about the wheelchair, and that she had given me a chance when nobody else would, and that she was gonna sue me for every penny I have. My personal favorite was when she called me an ungrateful cripple, which, yeah, she really said that out loud, and no, she didn't seem to realize how badly that would play in any future legal proceedings. I let her go on for about 2 minutes, and then I told her very calmly that all further communication should be directed to my lawyer, and then I hung up. My hands were shaking after that call, but not from fear, from anger, but also from the very specific satisfaction of knowing that she had just made her legal situation about 10 times worse with that phone call. Over the next couple of weeks, she tried every approach she could think of. She sent me texts alternating between threatening me and begging me to reconsider, sometimes within the same hour. One message would be, "My lawyer says you cannot do this, and you'll be hearing from him." And literally 20 minutes later it would be, "Can we please just meet and talk about this like adults? I'm sure we can work something out. I'll even offer you more money." Then an hour after that, "You're gonna regret this. I know people." I screenshotted everything, forwarded it all to my lawyer, and didn't respond to a single one. She even sent one of the other bartenders round to my flat to try to talk to me, but this poor lad turned up at my door looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on earth. He basically said that Karen had sent him to open a dialogue about a resolution, which I'm sure were her exact words that she had told him to memorize. I told him I had nothing against him personally, but this was between me and Karen and everything needed to go through the lawyers at this point. He apologized to me, looked genuinely relieved that the conversation was over, and then left. I felt bad for the guy. I heard later from another former colleague that Karen had told all the staff I was holding the bar hostage out of spite because I'm apparently bitter about being in a wheelchair and want to make everyone else miserable too. Absolutely classic Karen. Never her fault, always the victim. My 30-day notice period expired and I formally notified the licensing authority in writing that I was withdrawing as a license holder for a premises, and I included all the relevant documents, copies of my original agreement with Karen, proof of the termination of my employment, and everything else. I was extremely careful to do everything exactly by the book, no drama, no angry letters, no vindictiveness, just a proper legal process followed to the letter. She told me to take my stuff and go, so I did that. I took my stuff and went. What happened next was as predictable as sunrise to anyone who understood how licensing works in Gibraltar, but apparently came as an absolute thunderbolt to Karen. The licensing authority contacted her and informed her that the premises no longer had a valid licensee and that she was required to cease the sale of alcohol immediately until a new license arrangement was in place. She could keep the bar open for food and soft drinks, but not a drop of alcohol could be served or sold. Just take a second to picture that. A pub in the middle of a tourist area in Gibraltar, right where the cruise ship passengers walk past looking for a cold one, and it cannot serve a single beer, cannot pour a single glass of wine, cannot make a gin and tonic on a hot afternoon, in Gibraltar where it's sunny basically all the time and tourists want cold drinks. From what I heard through people I knew, and like I said, in Gibraltar you hear everything because the whole territory is basically one big village, Karen absolutely, completely and totally lost her mind. She apparently told the licensing officials that she would sort it out within days and then just kept serving alcohol anyway. She genuinely seemed to believe that the rules were more like suggestions and that if she just carried on as normal, nobody would notice or nobody would care enough to actually enforce anything. She apparently told her staff that it was just a technicality and that they should keep pouring drinks as normal. Yeah, that went exactly as well as you are imagining it would do. Here's the thing about licensing enforcement in Gibraltar. It's a small jurisdiction and the authorities take this stuff seriously because the whole territory's economy depends heavily on tourism and having businesses that operate properly and legally. Once they'd been formally notified that there was no valid licensee for the premises anymore, Karen's bar was pretty much on their radar. An inspection happened within a couple of weeks. They walked in and found the place in full operation, taps flowing, spirits being poured, cocktails being mixed, the works. All without a valid license, and this is where things went from bad to absolutely catastrophic for Karen. Selling alcohol without a license in Gibraltar is not a small administrative hiccup, it's not a fine and a finger wagging, it's a criminal offense under the Licensing and Fees Act, and the bar was ordered to be shut down immediately. During the inspection they also found several other issues that I won't go into too much detail about, but let's just say Karen's approach to health and safety regulations and food hygiene standards was about as thorough as her approach to employment law. There were violations stacked on top of violations. Meanwhile, my disability discrimination case was making its way through the process. My lawyer was confident from day one, and honestly, with the evidence we had, it would have been hard to lose. Karen had practically gift-wrapped the entire case with that initial phone call where she talked about wheelchairs not being the right image for her bar. And then there was the text she had sent me after our conversation that said, and I'm quoting word for word because I've read this text about 100 times, "I really am sorry about what happened to you, but you have to understand, a bar is a physical job and I need staff who can actually move around properly." My lawyer could barely contain himself when I showed him that one. She had basically written our closing argument for us. I'm not gonna go into every detail of the legal process because most of it was procedural and honestly pretty boring, lots of letters going back and forth, lots of waiting, but the outcome was that I received a significant settlement for unfair dismissal and disability discrimination. Karen's lawyers tried to argue that the dismissal was for genuine operational reasons, but when they were asked to produce evidence of the supposed restructuring, they had absolutely nothing. No restructuring plan, no written justification, no evidence that my specific role had been changed or eliminated in any way, because none of that existed. She just did not want a guy in a wheelchair in her bar. It was that simple and that ugly. As for the bar itself, last I heard, it is done. Finished. Karen tried to apply for a new liquor license in her own name, but her application was denied. It turns out the licensing authority is not super enthusiastic about granting licenses to people who have just been caught selling illegally after being told explicitly to stop. She tried to get one of her remaining staff members to apply as the new licensee, but by that point most of them had already quit because nobody wants to work for someone who's demonstrated that she'll be happily break the law and throw her employees under a bus when things go wrong. From what I was told, she ended up pleading guilty to the charge of selling without a license and got hit with a hefty fine, though I don't know the exact amount. I heard she eventually tried to sell the business, but there were no takers because everyone in Gibraltar knew the full story. In a place that small, that kind of reputation follows you around everywhere. The landlord ended up terminating her lease because she couldn't keep up with rent payments on a bar that couldn't sell its primary product. The space sat empty for a few months, and I believe someone else has since taken it over and is running it properly with their own license all sorted out. And yeah guys, please don't forget to like the video if you enjoy these malicious compliance stories. And now we will continue with another fantastic malicious compliance story. The next one is titled, "Want your dogs to be off-leash in the park? It would be a shame if they escape." So this is a unique one because it was malicious compliance against me and my neighbors by the city. I cannot stop thinking about how genius their malicious compliance was, so I had to post here. Some backstory: I live beside a 4-quadrant park with cross streets going through, so each quadrant is 1 block by 1 block in size, and one of those quadrants is fenced in and may or may not be owned by the local school district. There were some shady deals and it's not clear if they ever legally owned the quadrant. I won't go into details of that, but the neighborhood has been fighting for access to the park for as long as I can remember. Recently, that quadrant was completely renovated using public funds, and since it is used during the school day as an area for the kids, it has decent security. The only way in and out is through 4 doors at each corner of the quadrant. The deal struck with the community is that during non-school hours, M to F after 3 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, the quadrant would be open to the public and those doors would be unlocked. Well, shortly after the park opened, people, myself included, this is not am I the a-hole by the way, I know I shouldn't have done this is a self-deprecating post, we began letting their dogs run in this park. It was perfect since it was completely fenced in, and when others started complaining to the city, my wife and I stopped letting our dog in there, but others kept using it. The city just couldn't lock it up and deprive everyone access, but how to prevent unleashed dogs? Well, in my opinion, they came up with the most simple yet genius solution. Rather than lock all the doors to the park, they padlock them open during non-school hours. Now, if you come in to let your dog run there are 4 gaping escapes into a relatively high-traffic area that your dog could run through. I still see a few very well-trained dogs running around in there, but most people are not gonna risk it anymore. And yeah guys, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the Malicious Compliance and I will see you again tomorrow.